Hey guys, so I realized that in 2024, talking about a game that was released in 2015 might feel a bit dated, but I'm still playing Fallout 4 on and off, and it looks like from the modding community, so are a lot of people. So if anybody is still playing this game and thinking about mods, I wanted to talk about this a little bit. I actually, back in 2018, published a review about the Heather Casdin companion mod on my blog. Back then, it was an old blog before I did the Digimorphosis thing for all of my tech content. So in the nearly 10 years since Fallout 4 has been out, if you're an OG player like me that's played it and games before it from the beginning, we can probably both admit we were kind of different people back then. At this point, I've got over 1,800 hours into this game, so you can certainly say I've got my money's worth out of it. It's one of those games that, like, I'll play it and have a great time, and then I'll take a break from it and play some other stuff, but then I keep coming back to it. You know, every other game or two, I'm like, maybe I should do another Fallout character and do that for a few weeks or, whatever. At this point, I could say that I've tried basically every major companion mod on the Nexus over the years, including some gems that had a lot of potential that never really took off like the other ones for some reason. And mods like have a lot going for them, and I praise the author's work from it. In a technical way, the mod does a heck of a lot. It's really ambitious. It's great. But mods like those are ones that I've enjoyed a few times, and I try on and off, but they're not in my regular rotation, and that's nothing against the mod. It's just the style of it doesn't suit every playthrough. And then I find there are other mods that pretty much do find a permanent rotation in there. Tales of the Commonwealth is a great example of one. I'm not going to talk at length about it in this video, but that one was pretty much like I installed it to try it, and from the first time I put it in there, I'm like, this fits into the world so much it will work with any playthrough. It's just permanently part of my mod list. Every game I ever play has that in it now. And Heather, I find, is similar. I don't use her every character that I make, but I use her probably more frequently than any other companion mod than I've used over the years. And I wanted to now, a few years after the last review that I talked about it, talk about how I appreciate it a little bit more thoughtfully in a way that I hadn't in my 2018 review. So first of all, I feel like she feels like a more native character in the game in a way that most other mod companions don't. There are some pretty well done companions. I'm Darlene again is one of them. The Machine and Her is a quest mod that also is a companion. And the same thought would go for all of the companions you can get in the Thuggyverse mods, which those are sort of a genre of their own. But as well done as a lot of those are, I would say that they're foreign feeling or different enough that they, as cool as they are, feel like a mod character when you're using them, in a way that I don't think Heather and a couple others do. How I would define a natural feeling companion is basically asking myself this. Suppose someone added that companion into my mod list without me knowing, and it was early into my playing the game and not me with 1,800 hours into it. If I were playing and I encountered that in character in the game, would I just accept them as part of the game, or would I be wondering, like, is this a mod? As I have pondered this over the years, it struck me recently that there are really only two companion mods that I can think of that I would really say fit that criteria, and that's Heather and the companions in Tales of the Commonwealth. Now, obviously, Tales of the Commonwealth is it adds quests, it adds new locations, it adds a lot to the game. I really recommend it. But it also adds three companions that I think are excellently voiced. The recording quality is excellent. They blend seamlessly into the game. And like Heather, there's a lot of things about the comments they make, the factions they belong to, the setting those characters inhabit, where you find them, that just makes it feel like they're supposed to be there in the game. Other mods, like I mentioned, like the Machine and Her, great story. Probably one of the best stories of any mod that I've tried. But it also introduces story elements and locations and things like that into the game that feel removed from the rest of the Commonwealth in a way that, again, to me, like, it's obvious I'm playing a mod. A well-done one, but it's a mod. It's not like the base game. For some people, that might be the draw of a mod like that, but I find Heather's little comments about the world, her little observations about caravan guards, or how she thinks of cities like Diamond City or Good Neighbor and stuff.
Know what we should do when we get to Diamond City? First thing, noodles. We can take care of business after that.
It really makes it feel like she's been there many times, like she has real thoughts about them, praise or disdain for them. her own backstory with University Point. All of that stuff really gives her an organic feel in the game that I don't get from a lot of other companion mods that I've tried. And in an interview that she did at one point some months back, and link in the description there, she did mention that that exact thing was important to her while she was making the mod, and thought that was cool to hear that while I was listening to that interview. And I would say that I feel that she succeeded more than most in that aim. But I also feel like her reasons for joining you make more sense than even some of the vanilla companions. For instance, when you recruit Kate, she's basically being offered to you by her manager. Like, you wipe out all the raiders in the combat zone, and her manager is basically like, well, I can't use her anymore to make money, so you might as well take over the contract. And it's kind of clear that she doesn't have a lot of say in the matter. And in one of her affinity dialogues, she even mentions as much, where she pretty much tells you, I expected to hate you because of the way you just took over my contract. I think she sort of saw that as you seeing her as property, and she's sort of surprised when you become friends at that. And her story resolves in a meaningful way, but I don't know from a role-playing standpoint if I would totally expect somebody who was forced to join me, who didn't want to join me, to watch my back really reliably to ever get to those later points. So you can question parts of that a little bit. Strong, the whole reason he joins you is a mistaken belief in the milk of human kindness. Something that when Rex Goodman tells you about it, it's like he misunderstood it from one of the plays he was teaching it, and he just sort of let Strong keep believing that. And then you as the player, when Strong is like, I want to come with you so that we can find that together, the whole premise of you allowing him to come along is you also basically being like, sure.
Yes, I'll honor my promise.
Good. Strong travel with human. Human helps Strong find milk of human kindness.
I'm going to just let you keep believing that so that you come with me. And when you really unpack that for a minute, you're basically deceiving him into putting his life at risk for you into crazy situations for a goal that you know you're never going to fulfill. And you can have mixed feelings about that as well. When you first meet Piper, shortly after you do the interview with her, she basically offers to join you for what she feels as following a really juicy story. As a reporter, maybe that makes sense, but then you realize that she's basically the caregiver for her younger sister because they're orphans. There's no parents in the picture. And then you suddenly feel weird about, so she's just ditching her young sister with no parent figure in this city to go chasing some stranger that she just met because she thinks it would make for a cool story. Like, people can feel a little weird about that as well. And she even asks you about that later in one of her affinity dialogues. But even if you kind of tell her, yeah, maybe you should be with Nat more and not put the distance there, it doesn't change her behavior at all. She never is like, hey, we should go back to Diamond City and check on stuff. McCready starts out as a hired gun, which in itself is fine. But then before you know it, your earliest affinity dialogues is him actually giving you a mission, and now he wants you to go into this really dangerous area. At least in all of my playthroughs, it seems like regardless of what level I've been on, whether I've gotten McCready pretty early in the game or pretty late into the game, he describes Winlock and Barnes as nobodies, and they're going to be pushovers and easy. And every time I've gone up to the quest location for those, I've fought some of the hardest gunners that quite often were way out-leveled for me, and it was hard that early in the game to even do that quest. I feel like Nick Valentine, Dance, Preston, and Deacon are probably the most fleshed out characters that have the most plausible reasons for even being your companions in the game. Although I've basically never used Preston because I generally, at this point with how many playthroughs I've done, I generally avoid the Minuteman questline altogether. And by the way, did you know that you can do that? I've read in forums people saying I hate having to always go to Concord and do that same, blah, blah, blah. And if you didn't know, you can just avoid doing that. You don't have to go in the Museum of Freedom. You can even build settlements. And your character, they built that into the game, will phrase it more like, do you want to work for me than do you want to join the Minutemen? And you can do every other aspect of the game without ever even meeting Preston. So if you didn't know that, give that a try. Good way to mix the game up and not feel like you're doing the same beginning over and over again. But after all that, then there's Heather. She's a person who's gone through a lot of tragedy of her own, and she's out for revenge on a path that aligns pretty well with your own character's path for revenge, and it aligns really well all the way up to your confrontation with Kellogg. She's also a trader in need of somebody capable to get around. And she's looking to put some distance between the road and her past. Other than you may be wondering why would she trust a random stranger instead of some reputable caravan guard, she does actually explain that if you ask her. And if you ask me, everything else about her joining you makes a lot of sense, more than some of the other characters. Also, her story can last through most of the game. Her affinity builds pretty quickly if you get her early on, and if I could change one thing about the mod, I would just suggest that the affinity bonuses you get from level ups and traveling were a little smaller so that it slowed down the pace of how quickly you build affinity with her, stretch it out through more of the game. But since much of her aims align with your own, ultimately leading you both to that big confrontation with Kellogg, and the fact that she has all these goals of visiting remote areas in the Commonwealth, and then after Kellogg and beyond, if you romance her, there's a quest line that even takes you to Far Harbor. Her vendetta with the Institute makes it make a lot of sense why she would continue your fight, why she has a stake in tagging along with you, especially if you're fighting the Institute with any of the other factions. She really feels like someone who has her own aims, but that everything that she's after aligns well with what your character is trying to do, and that she would have like a personal reason to want to contribute to your goals. And I feel like for most of the other companions, it doesn't feel like that. A lot of them have a personal quest, which is cool, but then they don't really have a whole lot of content outside of that quest, and they just kind of feel like they're following you around because they like you, and that they don't really have a stake in anything else going on in the Commonwealth after that point. So for the sake of balance, I'll throw out some things that are probably nitpicks if we're honest. But these are a couple criticisms that occurred to me over the course of playing it again recently. Her bunker seems nicer and has better amenities than most of the Commonwealth. She has a working shower. Everything is very clean. Her bed is awesome. Even the bunker itself, having electricity and being underground and being as nice as it is, you could ask yourself from a role-playing standpoint, how could some random girl living in really remote from all of the major civilized areas of the Commonwealth, how does she have such nicer tech than everybody else? But it's not a big deal. You're not even there very often, so it's not that lore-breaking, but she never really does explain how she came to have the bunker. The other thing that jumped out at me was the last affinity dialogue that you have with her is a minor spoiler. So after you complete her personal quest and you get to the point where you're close to being able to romance her, she'll basically ask you if you're still in love with your spouse, the one that died in the beginning of the game. And your dialogue choices are basically only, you could say, yeah, my heart will always belong to them, or we're just going to stay friends, which terminates the romance. Or you can say, I don't know, I need time. It's not a big deal, because ultimately it leads you to the same place no matter what, if that's where you're trying to go. But as some of the characters I have played, if you're role-playing somebody who, over the course of the game at that point, has dealt with all their personal demons and the hurt of losing their spouse, and they've kind of put that behind them and made peace with it, you can't role-play that. And then it feels kind of jarring and unimmersive that I've, say, role-played a character who's like, I'm good with it. I've now even gotten my revenge on Kellogg. I'm at peace. I'm ready to move on with my life and find a new purpose, a new mission. And then this girl asks you, are you still hung up on your previous wife? And you have no choice but to suddenly be conflicted and unsure of yourself. That just feels a little weird to me. And then like 3 days later, your character is suddenly sure and they're suddenly ready. Maybe the mod author didn't think it was realistic for your character so soon to just be ready to jump into another relationship, but it would have been cool if there was an option for your character to kind of say, I didn't expect to be ready to move on and, love somebody else so soon, but, as I check in with myself, surprisingly enough, I am ready. That would have been a cool road. Not a big deal. Doesn't detract from my enjoyment of the mod in general, but I would say to nitpick, that's something that stood out to me every time I've used Heather. When I get to that point, it always feels weird. Lastly, why I would recommend it is this mod has had recent updates a couple of times. Now, when we're talking about a game that's 9 years old at this point, it's perfectly understandable that a lot of mods that were cool years ago have been abandoned as the modders have moved on to other games. This is a hobby, not a job. You can't expect them to keep maintaining a mod for years and years, and yet mods like Heather last year got a really big update, and then last month, I think, as of the time of recording this, got another update. So it's really cool after all this time to see a modder still supporting what, in my opinion, is already one of the most well put together companion mods on the Nexus. And if you're, after all this time, thinking of doing yet another playthrough, I would say even if you've played Heather before years ago, it might be worth installing it again on the new version just to see what's new, because when I had updated to whatever version she put out last year, I forget the number of it, versus what had been years back, that was a pretty big difference. Her lines are different. Her comments about areas are different. She re-recorded some of the dialogue. There's flavor stuff in there that's better. And there's a clear progression in her ability as a writer and a mod maker, Llama RCA, because I used Willow back in the day when I played New Vegas, and for the most part, I liked Willow, but there were some things that I really didn't like about how that played out. There were parts where I felt like Willow's story sort of overshadowed yours, or too much of the early part of the game became about chasing down people rather than like doing your thing. I think that's resolved a lot with Heather. Her personality makes a lot more sense as somebody who lives in the wasteland. She's not as like cutesy, to a point where it feels out of place in a wasteland. The way that she joins you fits nicely into whatever quest your character is currently working on, and you don't feel like you're sidelining everything you're doing to suddenly help Heather with her stuff. I just feel like she's done the delicate balance of that right. Even stuff you may not pay attention to, but struck me over time. Like there's a fine balance for any companion, even the vanilla ones, on how standout you want their comments to be, reacting to enemies in battle or places that you're going, where it's sort of like you want them to stand out enough so that the character has personality and there's some flavor to it, but you don't want her to be too memorable, because if they're too out there, inevitably these lines get repeated as you play, and if they're too memorable, then it just grates on you as you've heard it for like the 27th time. So you're like, it's got to be this middle area of like interesting, but like it's okay to hear it from time to time. And I think she does a really good job of nailing that, especially on these newer versions of Heather. And that's not stuff I talked about in my initial review, that I just felt like it was worth putting out there and sharing my appreciation for it, for sure. And I've not yet done a whole lot of gaming content on this channel. I mean to do more. And so this felt like a good start. So I want to really say thank you to Llama RCA for the great work over the years. I've played both of your companion mods in New Vegas and this one. I look forward to what you do in Starfield. Modders like you are where I've gotten all of my money's worth out of this game. It's crazy to think that 9 years ago I spent $59 on a game that I would put almost 2,000 hours into, and from a sheer like hours to money ratio, Fallout 4 is like the best game I've ever played from that standpoint, and I wouldn't have played it that many times if it weren't for all these great mods. If it was the vanilla game, I would have packed it up and put it on a shelf a long time ago. So really appreciate all your hard work. I just really wanted to acknowledge you in this video. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.